Thanks very much, Susan and Emily. And I'd also pay my respects to the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. They're sitting on their land. So it's good to think about the old people who were living on this country, and to any other First Nations people who are among us today. I'd especially like to recognise my sisters, Debra Nakamarra and Katherine Nakamarra, through kinship way. They're my sisters. I'm Nakamarra. So before talking about Debra and Katherine's work, I'd like to say something more about the company, Papunya Tula Artists. It's the organisation that I worked for, and I really got my break from my association with Papunya Tula Artists. So I'm forever indebted to the original artists who taught me and really provided formative experiences that the rest of my personal and professional life has been based on. Papunya Tula Artists was incorporated in 1972, and the impulse to incorporate that collective of artists came from the energy of 30 men who worked in the Papunya Men's Painting Room, which is the one end of the old town hall. The building's still there. If you ever go to Papunya, it's an old Nissen hut. Interestingly, the papers of incorporation were drafted by a young Paul Everingham, who would later become a chief minister for the Northern Territory. As Susan said, Papunya Tula created many of the precedents on which desert art and the organisation of desert art has followed. And those precedents have sort of spiralled outwards to other communities like Yuendamu, Balgo, Utopia. The list goes on and on. There's probably at least 50 arts organisations in arid Australia now that can trace an origin back to that Papunya Tula movement. But Papunya Tula Proprietary Limited is different in that it is a company. So the original 30 artists were shareholders of a company, and that company pays dividends every December to the artists and their descendants. It's the only one of those 50 or so arts organisations that's incorporated in this way. And over the decades of very good management at Papunya Tula Artists, it's returned considerable financial returns in the form of dividends, but also been the conduit for the reproduction of the works in copyright. So that organisation is really critical to people's economic foundation and their independence. So yeah, it's been incredibly effective through a turbulent time of the last 50 years. When so much else has changed, Papunya Tula has been one consistent. So it's now a very busy marketplace, but for Aboriginal art, Indigenous art, First Nations art. But one thing that characterises Papunya Tula painting is the fidelity to which the artists, contemporary artists like Debra and Katherine, keep to the conventions that were established by their elders, by their parents in the 1970s and in the 1980s. There's a strong continuity both through those familiar lines, but also through the representation, the means of representation of country. And I think you can see the way that these paintings are so tightly conceived and within this tradition of Papunya Tula painting. But of course that tradition goes way back beyond this moment of time that we're in our lives now goes well back thousands of years before the rise of agriculture in the Tigris and Euphrates, and way back before the first stories of Gilgamesh were written in clay tablets some 6,000 years ago. Does anyone know exactly how long? 4,000. So, yeah. So, Tjintjintjin, the site that is painted here by both Debra and Katherine, is on the songline of Kutunga, who is an ancestral snake woman. And that songline goes through a place called Putidara. So there in Putidara, in the Cleland Hills, is a place where there's been archaeology done over several decades now, and there are engraved marks in this style on the rock walls at Putidara that are the direct antecedents of what you see in the walls around you at the moment. I think those carvings, rock engravings, are at least 5,000 years old. And there's red ochre that's been painted on the walls of the rock shelter at Putidara that have dropped down to the earth, and through a technique of thermoluminescence been aged at between 8 and 16,000 years ago. So there's a tradition of this story, these symbols, that goes back that time. What's also remarkable is that karaku, that red ochre from the floor of the rock shelter at Putidara, comes from a place called Karaku. It's about 200 kilometres north of Putidara. I was looking at it just a few weeks ago. It's a place that's been continuously mined for, say 18,000 years. I was very lucky to go there with Johnny Warangula Juparula, the person who gave me my name, Nakamarra, in 1978, and we were mining karaku at that place. It's still used very frequently. I was touching karaku last week. So really that 1978 mining adventure, just digging out a flour drum full of red ochre and taking it around to various places, is just a moment in the deep time of Aboriginal history. So the art that's practiced by Debra and Katherine has very ancient origins. But more specifically, the symbols that are used by Debra and Katherine relate to their mother's country in the vicinity of the Northern Territory, Western Australia border, just a bit over, south of the road that goes right through to the Pilbara. It's about 600 kilometres west of Alice Springs. And the site, Tjintjintjin, is on the songline of Kutunga, a ferocious old snake woman who left a trail of destruction and death in her wake as she travelled from site to site. She was carrying a digging stick and a coolerman, the symbols of womanhood in the Western Desert. While many songlines, desert songlines, tell the story of an old man in pursuit of younger and more attractive women, it's a regular motif, such as the epics of Wadi Niru and the Kungarang Kalpa, Seven Sisters, or more in Pindibi country, Yina and the Kunga Jutta. In contrast, the story of Kutunga, the snake woman, is the most is a feminist story, if you like. She's the most fierce and feared agent in this story of murder, mayhem, and revenge. Way out west, Kutunga frightens the Warikujara, two very powerful men, goanna men, who eventually, because they're afraid of her, they fly away to escape her. She then smokes and cooks a group of people at Papunya Tula. At Wanajalnga, she beats a quail at the nest with her digging stick and then proceeds to eat all the birds' eggs. As a snake woman at Tjintjintjin, the site depicted around us, Katunga creates a great hole as a snake and enters the earth. A few weeks ago, I was at Wadikimpiri and at the place where some bettongs were living underground. And I just got up close, and from behind bushes there, this huge mulga snake just kind of went down into a hole right by my foot. The snake was about this big and, a poison snake. That's the power of the narrative that we see in front of us. I can still feel the visceral fear of that snake and its power there. But she was a woman with all womanly capacities and a snake as well. So after entering the earth, Katunga came out again, and at Murungi, near that Putidata site, the rock art site, she was sexually abused by a group of boys. And on discovering what happened when she woke up, Katunga grew angry. She then tracked and chases the boys around Murungi, this little group of rocky outcrops, eventually killing the boys with a digging stick. Katunga then cooks and eats the boys. Katunga, the snake woman's body, can be now seen as a great standing stone at Murungi. I've seen it myself. It's as big as this house and 5 times as tall. So this all happened literally, I think, 500 metres from where that archaeological site is and where the origin of this these symbols can be seen. At Putidata, they've taken the record back to 17,000 years, where the relatives of Pindibi people, Nakamarra's relatives, have been living in that area. So the antiquity of the Katunga story is only matched by the age of art at Putidata. Both reach into deep time. The essential signs that are painted by Debra and Katherine therefore go back further than any Greek tragedy. And in Australia, the ferocity of Katunga's wrath should be feared more than Medea's anger. Luckily for all, Katunga's anger is still in stone at the site she created. You can see her path across the landscape in various landforms. But echoes of her anger are apparent in the paintings of Katunga, the snake woman at Tjintjintjin, that are before you now. So there's the anger of the story, this feminist anger, if you like, but also I think you really feel Debra and Katherine's kind of love for their parents, Wallenkura, whose story comes directly to them, and Johnny Angut, who was a foundational painter at Papunya and who started painting, incidentally, when I was working there. So I hope you enjoy the beauty of Katherine and Debra's paintings, but while you're immersed in the surface of these paintings, it's also worth thinking of the deeper meaning, the epic themes that are evoked. The language of the dot and circle takes us back in time to the epic struggles, human struggles on this continent. They reveal to us the human condition in all its rawness and beauty. All of the paintings created by the Papunya Tula Artists have meaning. They are not simply paintings to sit passively on walls. These canvases evoke Jukurpa, the dreaming, and they relate to the creation of the country that we inhabit. The paintings reveal the antiquity of the ancestry of the artists who created them. They're a gift from the present and a monument to the past history of Indigenous people of the continent. So we're all so lucky to be able to share these paintings. And as we move through life, they move all of the public buildings. We can go and they emanate and they talk to us from those buildings. So Debra and Katherine, congratulations on this beautiful exhibition. And thanks very much for listening attentively. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you so much, John and Debra and Katherine. Really special opening. That was wonderful.